Hello, this is my Module 3 video about filtering water. My first step was to gather all of my supplies. So I have my cups, my push pins, the rubber bands, soil, and water to make the muddy water, and then everything that we were supplied with from the mail. Step 2 was to compare the supplies to the layers of earth, just as the students had done in the readings that we read and watching the YouTube video. So the cheesecloth, which I thought was the most fascinating part, I had never heard of the humus layer before, but this acted as the roots of the trees and some of the grass. The gravel I used as the topsoil, and then there was the sand, and then after that was the charcoal and the alum and the coffee filter. The bottom of the cup represented the bedrock because the water wasn't going to go through that. So I actually did this experiment in class, and in school. It was fascinating. I had some of the other teachers help me so that I had an extra set of hands in case something went wrong. This was me mixing the water with some of our soil in the backyard, and this is what my filter looks like before the water went through it. So I did run into a little bit of a problem because my coffee filter actually folded and was not filtering. So we ended up coming up with a solution to the problem, which you'll see in the next video, in the next couple slides. So this was what happened when this was the original coffee filter, but you can see it was not filtering clear water. So I ended up getting another filter, and then it actually did come out successful. And it's still here, so it's still pretty clear. And this was the successful attempt. So this was the working filter. This is what came up. This was where the original filter was. This was the charcoal layer, the sand layer, and then this was the humus layer at the top. You can see it collected a lot. So you can watch this little clip of me pouring the water down, and it is working. And then it starts to get a little bit slower. And then the next video clip, you can see that there's a little bit of a problem right around here. The coffee filter was folding and the little mud was coming through. But eventually it worked, and I ended up with clear water, which was awesome. The next step is related to the inquiry continuum about teacher-guided versus self-guided. And in feature 1, we were provided with the question and some of the materials in order to explain the activity. So I thought this part was teacher guided, but it moves towards self-guided as we go to feature 2, which talks about giving priority to evidence and allowing us to relate the materials to the Earth's layers and analyze which part played what in the roles. In feature 3, we were able to formulate explanations from the evidence and figure out any problems that happened throughout the process if they occurred. In features 4 and 5, we were able to evaluate explanations and communication effectively. I was able to work with some colleagues to figure out what happened in the experiment when it went wrong. And I also thought that it was interesting when the reading talked about how this relates to how students might be able to relate it to a drought. But then I also thought about maybe what happens in a natural disaster, or if there's a flood, how could Earth really filter that part of the water, and why does it take so much time? I also think that it relates to our first reading because it allowed us to talk about factual knowledge, which is the Earth's layers, and how to create this big concept of filtering water. It developed habits of minds and allowed me to really reflect on what issues may have been occurring and assess my own understanding of the problem and the experiment that I was doing as the students as well. It allowed me to become a scientist, but also an engineer in order to design my own filter. And it also allows us to think about the levels of inquiry and how it can start as teacher-guided and go all the way to self-guided instruction. I thought this quote was great because I was working with colleagues, and it allowed me to really go outside of my classroom on a daily basis and to communicate effectively and become a scientist instead of a math teacher for a day. And these were some of the resources that I used in the project.